Hi guys, my name's Rob from Vision PD. Welcome to our helicopter. In this video we're going to be having a gravel lock and it's my first time, so wish me luck. So for those of you who haven't watched the other video where we put the gabions down, did the fencing, did most of my workshop, we did do the brickwork down there, but I've redone it. I've changed the route so that you come down the block paving and then onto what's going to be the gravel lock, pergola above there, and then we're going to have a ramp down here which will also be block paving into the main part of the garden. And I've basically just added some edging around the sides. This is going to be our fire pit here. I've done some levelling and I've moved the stone that we had left from the gabions into our water feature, which is working at the moment, although not quite as I'd hoped. We've got a trough at the bottom which holds the water, a pump over in that corner which pumps the water up to the top. There's another trough over there and that trickles the water down here. We're really just after it making a nice noise with the switch. You can just hit the filter now, but when you clear that out it sounds okay. It's got a nice trickling. I'd hope they would be wet, but it's also my first go to water feature, so it's okay. I'm going to cover the front in tiles, same tiles that we're going to use for the fire pit over here. And then this section here is also going to be gravel lock, and you can see I've sectioned off into quarters, if you like, so that I don't have to pour it all in one go, because I'm going to be mixing and laying at the same time, and that's a bit much for laying it all in one go. For those of you who think I'm crazy for using carpet as a weed killer, we've used carpet for our back doorstep or back door mat for ages, and it's completely free of weeds. So I realised I haven't actually explained what gravel lock is, and obviously it's gravel with a glue which binds it together. You trowel it down and it sets hard like a tarmac. You've got different sized gravels, because if you had just one size of gravel, when they stick together they'd have a very small contact site and they wouldn't be very strong. So by having smaller gravel to fill in the gap, which is also bound with the glue, you end up with a much stronger bond. You've got 2-part glue, epoxy glue, mix them together, you've got a hardener and the main part of the glue. You've got a sand to fill in the smaller gaps. You'll also need your strongest coffee, or in my case oolong tea. You'll need a trowel, and if you don't want to buy a pool trowel which has rounded ends, you can just buy the cheapest possible rectangular one and cut the ends off like I've done. WD-40, which you spray on the tools to stop the glue sticking to it. It still will stick a bit, but it wipes off a bit easier. And then white spirit, which you can clean the trowel off as best you can between pours so that nothing sets on the end. Bucket to mix it in, and you're ready to go. Because you have to mix 3 of the larger gravel to 1 of the smaller gravel to 1 of the sand, I've split a full mix into 3 buckets. Usually you'd use a much bigger bucket, you can mix it all together, but I haven't got a much bigger bucket and I wouldn't be able to pour it if I did. And I'm the pourer and the troweler, so the way I've done it is split it between 3 buckets so that I can mix it all in one go and then pour it much more easily than mixing it in a big one. I'm going to explain why I've drilled holes all the way around the bottom of the fire pit. Drilled all the way around there. The tiles that we'll set on the top here won't be covering the holes that we've drilled, and then the holes that you can see are just below the edging here, so you won't see it, but it's for airflow reasons. And I'll start by explaining why when you stand in front of a barbecue, the smoke blows in your face. When a fire is going or a barbecue is going, heat rises, and when the heat rises, it's the air that's rising. You need new air to replace the air which is rising. So if you imagine the heat's coming up like this, air that wants to come in to the barbecue will come in this way, and if you're standing in front of the barbecue or a fire, you're blocking that flow, which creates a bit of a vacuum, which means that the air rising and also the smoke which is in the air will start to come towards you. So even though you're standing by a barbecue and you think the smoke's following you, you move around and it really does follow you, it really is following you. So with the same principle, we've cut the holes here, because if you've got a fire in the fire pit here, the air rises. Because it's all hot air, nothing can get in, or it'll try and get in, but it won't be getting in very effectively to replace the hot air rising. Whereas if you drill the holes around the side, the hot air can come out of here nicely, and then the cool air, or the newer air, can flow through the holes in the bottom, hopefully making it burn a bit more efficiently. So we're about 3/4 of the way through, and a couple of things I've learned since I began is that mixing is a lot harder than it looks. So I split it into 6 buckets instead of 3, because the mixer won't go through the volume of gravel that's in a bucket if there's only 3. So I've had to divide it by half again. It ripped one of my mixers as well, so I've changed from one of these rubber ones to a metal paddle, which seemed to help. Second thing is, if you've got an edge like this when it's still wet, you're okay. If it's within the same day, you're probably still okay. However, I left one overnight over there, and there's a bit of a seam that you can see. The reason I left it overnight is because I did a seam on the first bit, and that was fine, but I think that's because it was within the same day, so even though it looked like it was dry, probably wasn't, which meant it blended a lot better. Third thing is that the sand that I'm adding, I thought was some kind of binder. I knew it was a sand, but I thought it functioned to help it glue together a bit stronger. Turns out that if you don't get the sand completely even between all the buckets, it ends up changing the colour enough that you can see the difference. So that's a bit annoying, but I've only made that mistake once. And finally, it's actually pretty nice to work with. It sort of flows, but stays where it is. So troweling it's the joy, mixing it's not. And once you've got it where you want it, you can sort of spread it nice and flat. You can tamp it like that to compress it. If you don't like it, you can move it again. It stays wet for long enough to join the edges. So if you are going to join the edge though, what they say is leave the edge rough like that, so there's something for it to grab to. If you cut it square and chop it off, you end up with a bit of a seam, which you'll end up seeing. So they say just leave it sort of rough, and then you can bind them in a bit more naturally rather than a straight edge. But 3/4 of the way through, one more section to do over there. By the end of it, hopefully I'll have made all the mistakes possible, and then if I do this job again, we'll be okay. Okay, so that's that job done. What have we learned? We've learned the mixing is much harder than it looks, and if you've got somebody around that can help you out, that is definitely a must. Secondly, make sure it's mixed very, very, very well. Buckets worked okay for me, but it was a real fight. I was fighting the mix, and that meant that trying to get it down was difficult because it had, I was spending so long mixing it that it was setting as I was trying to lay it. It worked out okay, but I think the mix is the most challenging element. Secondly, the sand, make sure you get your mixes completely consistent. There was only one bit that we did that didn't end up consistent, but that's because I didn't know the sand was affecting the colour. I suppose if I really thought about it, it's fairly obvious, isn't it? But we made those mistakes. I should also say, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but this is my own garden. We don't do experiments on work that we're planning on selling to customers. It's usually my stuff that we play with, and then when we come to the customer jobs, we know that we're going to do the proper job, so it's usually on ours that we just experiment on. What else have we learned? Some of the videos I've watched use duct tape around the edges to stop any of the glue getting on it, and I think if you're very careful, that's not really necessary. But it might be better to be safe than sorry. I wanted to get this done quickly so we could get on the flats upstairs, so I would probably say that's a good idea, but we managed to get away without staining any of the edging, so we were lucky on that. We learned anything else? The final roll coat, that was needed. I didn't think I would have to do that, but when I walked around on it, some of the top felt like it could have done with an extra layer of glue, and they say you should reapply it after every few years anyway, so I think that was a good idea. But the thing we learnt on that, and it might be due to the heat today, is that stuff dries really quickly. So if you mix a whole bucket like I did, thinking you can roll it around, that'll set before you get through it. So we wasted half a bucket on there, but it's probably better to mix them in smaller batches and then roll them, or perhaps do each section individually rather than trying to do the whole lot like I did. But there we go. If this is the kind of content you like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.